Experts from both red and blue states warn the damage from the deep cuts to Medicaid in President Trump's spending bill could extend far beyond rural hospitals, impacting vital services like preventative care, food programs, and forcing essential rural clinics to shut down, putting lives at risk.
I grew up in Section 8 housing, relied on SNAP benefits, food stamps to have dinner on the table. I was a free lunch kid in public school my entire life. I was on Medicaid so I could go to the doctor's, right, get a physical to play sports in school. The things they are debating right now in DC, I have lived. And that is not true for most members of Congress.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch Network. As I have long maintained, one of the problems with our representative system is that the people we vote into office often grow distant from the issues we elect them to solve. And it's not as if those issues are going to get easier. Trump's big, ugly bill is poised to devastate the programs on which so many Americans rely, just so the ultra-wealthy can get their tax breaks. It's long past time that we start elevating Democratic candidates who understand at a visceral level what is at stake. Deja Foxx is that candidate for Arizona's 7th Congressional District. She is running in the special election there, and the primary is just days away. Deja is young, sure, but that does not mean she lacks experience. If anything, her life story as the daughter of a single mom on Medicaid gives her an edge. I think you'll agree. Here's our conversation. Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I'm joined today by Deja Foxx, who's running in the special election, the primary in Arizona's 7th Congressional District. We normally don't do primaries here, but Chris Goldsmith, who is a regular on this show, convinced me to make an exception. You got a bunch of fans, Deja, but Chris is at the top of the list. Tell us what's going on, why this race is important, and what it can teach us about the mood of the country at this moment when Trump is overreaching in ways we haven't seen in generations, in which he's abusing his power in ways the framers never even conceived of. Your election is an opportunity to gauge the sentiment of the American people about these kinds of things.
That's right. My name is Deja Foxx, and I'm running in Arizona's 7th Congressional District. As you mentioned, it's a special election held because my member of Congress passed away in March. And what you need to know about this special election is that it is our first chance since 2024 at a federal level in some ways to make a statement on who we are as a party and as a country, if we've learned our lessons. I think one of the big themes coming out of that 2024 election was that our party has failed to have a conversation around age. It's a natural conversation in an election like the one I'm running in, brought to you because my member of Congress passed away. It is also a conversation about not red to blue, right? But who are we as a party? Who is the generation of leaders that's going to go and stand up to Trump? What kind of leaders are we looking for? And this 2025 special election, not only is that referendum on 2024, but looking ahead at 2026 and the midterms, which is going to affect people all across the country, this election is an opportunity to send a loud and clear message that young, disruptive leaders are winners. And that message will change who is recruited, funded, and endorsed in states all across the country in 2026.
I imagine you are facing some stiff resistance, not just from the Republicans who oppose what both of us stand for, but from some in the Democratic establishment who want to cling to power. And look, I've experienced this in ways myself. It seems like a number of state parties around the country exist to keep existing Democrats in power and not to introduce more Democrats to power and get new Democrats elected. What are you seeing in Arizona?
Yeah, there is a culture of selection over election. And it's true that a whole lot of folks in the Democratic establishment and party are afraid of primary elections, which are an essential function for getting the best candidates in the room, for giving people an opportunity to get engaged outside of presidential elections, and bringing in new talent to this party. And so When I decided to get into this race, I had about 7 days after my member of Congress passed away to decide if I was even going to get into this. We had about 100 days total in the run. And so I had to make really quick decisions. But the biggest question I had to ask myself, and now in terms of my experience, I've worked behind the scenes of campaigns. I did digital strategy for Kamala Harris on her first presidential run in 2019 and in front of the cameras in 2024. I spoke at the DNC. I traveled through Arizona on the Reproductive Freedoms bus tour. But I had to ask myself, can I, in good faith, continue to work behind the scenes or in front of the camera if we don't give people a candidate that they can get excited about, that they can see themselves in, that they can feel hopeful about, right? I feel that our party has too often picked the most predictable option instead of what gives people a sense of possibility. And that's what we're seeing in our race. I'm running against someone who is the former congressman's daughter, has a legacy last name, inherited his fundraising list, his email list, right? And this race is calling into question our political systems, right? Questioning legacy last names and big dollar donors and their influence on our political system.
Yeah, well, that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up for a bunch of reasons. But I'm sure you face your own criticism, so I'll just put it out there in the open. What do you say when people come at you with, look, you are barely old enough to be a member of Congress, right? Isn't the constitutional requirement 25 years old? What gives you the needed experience to represent however many hundreds of thousands of Arizonians in CD7? Why are you ready to do this at the age of 25, and what makes you a better candidate? Let's put you up against the archetype, not the Nepo candidate. That to me is an easy call. But how do you respond to that?
If the way we have always done things was going to get us out of this mess, it would have by now. Clearly, the way things have always been done isn't working. And that's because Donald Trump and these MAGA Republicans have changed the rules. And Donald Trump has been running for president since I was 15 years old. I know his game. In fact, I got my start, though I'm young, 25, advocating a decade ago. And it comes from a personal place. I was raised by a single mom. I grew up in Section 8 housing, relied on SNAP benefits, food stamps to have dinner on the table. I was a free lunch kid in public school my entire life. I was on Medicaid so I could go to the doctor's, right, get a physical to play sports in school. The things they are debating right now in DC, I have lived. And that is not true for most members of Congress. To them, this is a line item on a spreadsheet, when to you, it is your ability to just get by. And I know it from the other side.
Hey, it's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who's been following and supporting this show and this channel. None of it happens without you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my Substack page, I'd really appreciate the follow. It's a great way to make sure you never miss an episode. It's free to sign up. And if you're able to pitch in a few bucks, every dollar goes back into the show. Just search for The Ken Harbaugh Show on Substack or click the link below. Thanks.
When I was 15, I was homeless because my mom was struggling with addiction. I was alone. I ended up living with a boyfriend and his family, but at the very same time, I was taught a sex education curriculum, last updated in the 80s. It didn't mention consent. It was medically inaccurate. It was governed by something called no promo homo laws. It was taught, and you'll get a kick out of this, by the baseball coach. Like, come on. And if you ask yourself, okay, but how do we end up in situations like that? It is because elected officials, like the ones on my school board, one of whom I am running against in this race, avoid controversy at the expense of the people they represent, right? And so it took a young person like me showing up to these school board meetings, sharing vulnerable stories I never should have had to share in front of a room full of adults, bringing my friends along, our peers, our allies, our parents, our teachers. And after 6 months of organizing, We won a unanimous victory to rewrite the curriculum in Southern Arizona's largest school district. That was a decade ago. And I scaled up my work. Under the first Trump administration, I organized against Republicans who tried to defund Planned Parenthood centers here in Arizona where I got care when I had no money, no parents, and no insurance. And so I'm quick to tell people that I have a different kind of experience. I know power from the other side of the dais, and we need more activists in Congress right now.
You mentioned that Donald Trump has been running for president since you were 15 years old. One of my concerns, and look, I'm a dad, I've got 3 kids. We talk about this all the time. One of my concerns is that, as appalled as I am about the state of our country and the state of our politics, it's become normal by definition for people of your generation because it's all you've seen. This insane clown in the White House is actually by definition a normal president because he's basically all you've gotten to see. How do you think about that? How do you talk to people your age about how unusual, how anomalous this is in American history and why we have to fight it?
Well, I think this is one of those generational rubs where there is just a fundamental misunderstanding. And I actually think I have to communicate in some ways to older generations what my generation is feeling and thinking, right? My generation saw Obama elected when we were 8, 9, 10 years old. It felt like anything was possible. And that makes sense in the head of a 4th grader, right? That if you do the right things, anything is possible. And then when we were teenagers, we saw Hillary Clinton, who was head and shoulders more qualified for the job, lose to Donald Trump. And it shook everybody up. But what is more appalling is that in 2024, we saw America make the same choice. And it says something loud and clear to young people that things can and will get worse if we don't do something. I think there's a lot of folks of a generation or 2 older who believe that if we just put our heads down and we get through the next 4 years, things are going to be okay again. That the Republican Party of our parents' generation will come back. And people of my generation, Gen Z, are here to tell you it's not coming back. And in fact, it can and will get worse if we don't do something now. And so when people ask me, okay, well, why run for office so young? Why Congress? I have to say to them, we don't have time to waste. There's a world in which, and I do not mean to sound like an alarmist, but I remember the days where people thought McCain was bad, where people thought someone like a Mitt Romney or a Jeff Flake here in Arizona. My first viral exchange was standing up to Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona. And I hate to be an alarmist here, but it's not impossible that in 8 years, after Donald Trump has pulled apart so many of our political systems, consolidated power in the executive branch, that if we don't work really hard right now to win big in 2026 and 2028, that we are in a worse spot in 10 years, in 5 years than we are now.
100%. Deja, where can people learn more about you and about your campaign? The primary is right around the corner, so we're going to rush this out, but where can people find you?
Yeah, we are at dejafoxx.com, and you can learn more about my story, right? Being raised by a single mom, working at the gas station, being the first in my family to go to college, the decade of advocacy experience. You can learn more about where we stand on the issues, and you can volunteer virtually or in real life. And I want to ask folks, if you've got it, to pitch in. This is a grassroots campaign. 99% of our donors are small dollar donors. Our average contribution is literally $27.73, and we have raised over $500,000. It takes tens of thousands of people to get where we are and send a loud message that a new generation of working class leaders isn't just possible, but necessary. So get in our corner. We've got 2 weeks left to get it done.
Great. We'll keep tracking. Thanks for joining us, and good luck, Deja.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You bet.